A flight like no other. The roar of the engines settled into a steady hum as passengers filed into the first-class cabin of Flight 782, a non-stop journey from New York to Tokyo. It was the kind of flight reserved for business elites, movie moguls, and influencers who couldn't be bothered with time zones or middle seats. Everyone in that cabin was someone, at least in their own mind. Except for the man sitting quietly in seat 1A. Wearing a faded black hoodie, old jeans, and scuffed boots, he looked like he'd wandered in from coach by mistake. His long hair was tied back loosely, and dark shades hid his eyes from those who glanced at him with passing curiosity. There was no security detail, no entourage, just a canvas messenger bag at his feet and a paperback book in his hand, its edges soft and worn, the kind of book you only carry if you've read it more than once. Keanu Reeves didn't need attention. He never did. To most of the first-class passengers, he was just another tired traveler. Someone quiet. Someone alone. But to the man seated in 1C, he was an opportunity. That man was Darren Blake. Darren had made his money young. Some tech company acquisition in the early 2000s had ballooned into a fortune. He wore wealth-like armor, shiny cufflinks, a gold Rolex, tailored pants that looked too expensive to sit in. He never flew commercial unless first class was the only option. And even then, he expected people to know who he was. So when he took his seat and noticed the man next to him, slouched, head down, clearly not up to first-class standards, he scoffed. He didn't recognize Keanu at first. The hoodie and the humility masked the global icon underneath. "You sure you're in the right seat, buddy?" Darren asked, voice tripping with sarcasm. Keanu looked up slowly, offering a small, polite smile. "Yeah, this is 1A." Darren chuckled and shook his head. "Did you win the lottery or something?" The woman across the aisle gave Darren a sideways glance. A flight attendant paused as she passed, but didn't interject. Keanu just nodded politely and returned to his book. But that wasn't enough for Darren. "I mean, no offense, but I don't usually see people dressed like you up here." Not judging, just surprised, I guess. Keanu closed his book and turned to face him. "I like to be comfortable when I fly," he said, voice calm, almost apologetic. Darren grinned. "Comfortable? Man, you look like you just walked out of a soup kitchen. No offense." "Of course." Keanu said nothing. He didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply adjusted his position, leaning back into his seat, clearly choosing peace over pride. But across the aisle, a teenage girl, maybe 16, had taken notice. Her eyes widened, her hand trembling as she texted rapidly on her phone. It didn't take long. Within minutes, whispers began to ripple across the cabin. "Wait, is that Keanu Reeves?" Someone pulled out a phone discreetly and opened Google Images. It was. And Darren noticed. He looked again, really looked. The face beneath the hood, the stubble, the voice. And suddenly, his smug grin faltered. "Wait, are you Keanu Reeves?" Keanu looked up again, not with annoyance, but with quiet patience. He nodded. "Yeah." Darren's face went pale. "No way. Dude, you're the Keanu Reeves." Keanu offered a light chuckle. "Last I checked." The teenage girl gasped. "Oh my God, Mom, it's really him." The ripple turned into a wave. Whispers turned into murmurs. Murmurs into attention. The entire first-class cabin now buzzed with energy, and not for Darren Blake. People began to fumble for their phones, too embarrassed to ask for selfies, but too starstruck not to sneak a photo or two. And Darren. He shrank in his seat. Keanu, sensing the shift in the atmosphere, stood up quietly and walked to the galley. He asked the flight attendants if he could get a cup of green tea. His voice was so soft, so respectful, that they stumbled over themselves trying to serve him. "He's even more polite in person," one of them whispered. Back at his seat, Darren fidgeted. He tried to act casual, tried to recapture the confidence he'd lost the moment he realized who he was talking to. But it was gone. Every word he had spoken echoed back at him like a slap. "Did you win the lottery? You look like you walked out of a soup kitchen." He wanted to disappear. But it wasn't over. When Keanu returned to his seat, Darren forced a chuckle. "Hey man, sorry about earlier. I didn't recognize you. Big fan, by the way. The Matrix changed my life." Keanu smiled. "Thanks." There was a pause. Then Keanu leaned in slightly, his voice low but firm. "You know, Darren, it's okay not to recognize someone, but it's never okay to disrespect them." Darren blinked. I wasn't." Keanu raised a hand gently. "You were. It's okay. Just maybe something to think about." That silence. It was deafening. But Keanu wasn't angry. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a scene. He didn't post a rant online or call for Darren to be banned from flying. He simply returned to his book, sipping his tea, letting the moment speak for itself. And that was what left everyone speechless. Not the fact that it was Keanu Reeves, but the fact that he didn't act like it. No security, no ego, no payback. Just grace. Pure, unshakable grace. And somewhere over the Pacific Ocean, Darren Blake sat in stunned silence. Because for the first time in years, he'd been reminded of something money could never buy. Dignity. The ripple effect. By the time the plane leveled out above the clouds, a strange silence had taken hold of the first-class cabin. It wasn't uncomfortable. It wasn't awkward. It was respectful, almost reverent. The quiet hum of the engines was now louder than the chatter of the wealthy executives and influencers who'd boarded with a sense of self-importance. Keanu Reeves had said only a few words, soft, composed, and direct. But those words had struck something deeper than any viral tweet or media soundbite ever could. It's okay not to recognize someone, but it's never okay to disrespect them. They echoed in the mind of Darren Blake like a drumbeat. For a man who had spent most of his adult life being praised, followed, and envied, Darren wasn't used to being on the receiving end of humility. He was used to people trying to impress him, to flatter him, to earn his attention. But now, in the presence of someone who didn't demand respect, only deserved it, he felt like a fraud in a $5,000 suit. Keanu, meanwhile, had returned to his seat, his book open again, though he hadn't turned a page in minutes. Instead, he stared thoughtfully out the window, as if the sea of clouds beneath them was whispering stories only he could hear. An unexpected letter. An hour into the flight, a young flight attendant approached Keanu, holding a small note in her hand. "Excuse me, Mr. Reeves," she said, a bit nervously. "This is from the girl in 2A. She asked if I could pass it to you." Keanu smiled kindly and accepted the note. "Thank you." He unfolded the paper carefully. It was handwritten in neat, rounded print. The ink was blue. There were tiny, smiley faces drawn in the corners, clearly written by someone young, but thoughtful. "Dear Mr. Keanu Reeves, I know who you are. I've seen you in movies since I was little. My dad says you're a real-life hero, too. I saw how that man was mean to you. I think you're very kind. I want to be kind like you when I grow up. Thank you for not yelling or being rude back. My name is Leela. P.S. My dad is sleeping, but he also loves your movies, especially Speed." Keanu smiled softly. He folded the note and placed it gently inside the cover of his book, as if storing something sacred. Then, standing up quietly, he walked back to row 2. The cabin watched, curious. He leaned slightly toward Leela, who sat beside her father, and whispered something to her. She beamed. Then she nodded. He gave her a fist bump, then gently patted her shoulder and returned to his seat. She looked like she'd just met Santa Claus, a Marvel hero, and a Buddhist monk all at once. The flight continued. Darren's inner war. For Darren Blake, the silence became unbearable. He watched Keanu from the corner of his eye, unsure whether to speak again. Apologizing once had felt like enough. Now, doing it again might seem fake. But doing nothing, that felt worse. The old Darren would have scoffed, would have convinced himself he'd done nothing wrong, that it was just a misunderstanding, that snowflakes were too sensitive these days. But Keanu hadn't overreacted. He hadn't tried to embarrass him. He had just told the truth. And that truth was now working its way into Darren's conscience like a slow-burning ember. The man behind the hoodie. A little while later, a storm began brewing outside the window. The sky turned charcoal gray. Lightning flickered in the distance. The captain's voice crackled through the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're expecting some turbulence over the Pacific. Please remain seated and fasten your seatbelts. Cabin crew, please prepare for rough air." Keanu reached for his seatbelt and calmly clicked it into place. Darren did the same, shifting in his seat. The plane began to shake slightly. It wasn't dangerous, just unsettling. The kind of turbulence that made people grip their armrests a little tighter. Next to Keanu, a woman across the aisle gasped quietly. Her face had gone pale. She clutched the seat in front of her. Keanu noticed. He leaned forward. "Are you okay?" The woman looked up, startled. "I'm not great with flying. I get really nervous during turbulence." Keanu nodded understandingly. "Would it help if we talked?" She blinked. "Talked? Sometimes just focusing on something else helps. Want me to tell you a story?" She laughed nervously. You want to tell me a story?" Keanu shrugged. "It's a long flight." A few passengers nearby chuckled softly. And then, right there, mid-flight, in the middle of a rough patch of turbulence, Keanu began to talk. Not about Hollywood, not about fame, but about a stray dog he'd rescued during the filming of a movie in Chile. How it had followed him around set for weeks, how he'd named it Santiago, how he'd snuck it onto a private jet and brought it home. "Dogs don't care who you are," he said, smiling. "They just care if you're kind." By the time the turbulence passed, the woman was smiling too. Everyone nearby had heard the story, and no one had thought about the shaking plane once. The ripple gets deeper. An hour later, Darren did something he hadn't done in years. He stood up, turned to Keanu, and extended his hand. "I want to apologize. Again," he said, voice quiet but firm. "I'd spent so much time thinking I mattered because of my money. But you made me realize I've got a lot of growing up to do. I was rude. I judged you. And you didn't deserve that." Keanu stood too. He looked at Darren's hand, then shook it. "No hard feelings, Darren." "You mean that?" "I do." Darren looked relieved. But Keanu added, "I hope next time you'll say that to someone who doesn't turn out to be famous." That hit Darren like a second slap, but this one was welcome. He nodded. Yeah, I will." They sat back down. Two men from completely different worlds, now speaking the same language. The flight that changed lives. By the time Flight 782 began its descent into Tokyo, the atmosphere in first class had completely shifted. People weren't posturing anymore. No one cared who had the most expensive watch. The man who had been disrespected was now the quiet center of a ripple effect of humanity. Passengers thanked him as they disembarked. Some shook his hand. One elderly man gave him a thumbs up and said, "That was the classiest thing I've seen in my 70 years of flying." But Keanu, he just nodded, smiled, and let everyone go ahead of him before he exited the plane last. No fanfare, no selfies, no shouting. Just one quiet man who had turned a moment of disrespect into a life lesson no one on that plane would ever forget. The last word. As Darren Blake walked through customs, his assistant greeted him with his usual grin. "Mr. Blake, how was the flight?" Darren paused, then looked over his shoulder, as if still feeling the echo of 1A. "It was humbling," he said simply. Then he added, Book me economy next time. His assistant blinked. Economy, sir. Yeah, I think I need to remember what it's like not to be at the top. The assistant stared, stunned, and Darren walked away, with a little less ego and a lot more heart. What happens in silence? Tokyo nights, silent lessons. The night air in Tokyo was cool and crisp as Keanu stepped out of the terminal, slipping his hood back over his head. Neon signs glowed across the city like pulses of electricity. The bustle was constant, taxi horns, chatter, digital billboards flashing bright colors against the darkness. Yet despite the energy of the metropolis, Keanu moved quietly, almost invisible. He walked past the waiting paparazzi at arrivals without even a second glance. They hadn't been tipped off. No one from Flight 782 had tried to sell the story. Not even Darren. And Keanu liked it that way. His driver, a soft-spoken man named Hiro, greeted him with a respectful bow and opened the door of a modest black sedan. Not a limo, not a luxury SUV. Just a car. Keanu nodded back. Thank you, Hiro-san. They drove in silence for several minutes, Tokyo's lights sweeping across Keanu's face like ripples in a calm sea. Hiro finally spoke, eyes still on the road. Your flight, was it pleasant? Keanu gave a faint smile. It was important. Hiro didn't ask more. He knew better. A hotel encounter. Keanu checked into a modest hotel tucked between two towering glass buildings downtown. The receptionist, a young woman named Suki, did a double take when she saw his ID. She leaned in, whispering, "You're Keanu Reeves." He smiled. "Just Keanu tonight, if that's okay." Suki beamed, nodded, and handed over his key card without a word to anyone else. Her professionalism, even in the face of starstruck awe, didn't go unnoticed. But as Keanu turned to head toward the elevators, a voice behind him barked loudly across the lobby. "Excuse me, miss, hello. I've been standing here for 10 minutes. A tall man in a navy business suit, American accent, heavy cologne, and even heavier attitude stepped forward, slamming his passport down on the counter. Keanu paused. The man's tone was aggressive, dripping with entitlement. "I have a reservation. Suite 14A. I expect the room to be ready and my dinner waiting upstairs." Suki began to explain something about a delay in housekeeping, but the man wasn't listening. "I paid over $2,000 for this room. You people should have this figured out." Keanu's hand tightened slightly around the strap of his bag. He took a breath, then turned around. "Excuse me," he said gently, stepping between the man and the desk. The man raised an eyebrow. "What?" "She's doing her best," Keanu said quietly. "It's late. She's probably been on her feet all day. No need to raise your voice." The man looked him up and down. "You again? Wait. I know you. What's your name? John Wick guy, right?" Keanu nodded. The man scoffed. "Didn't expect a movie star to be playing hotel hero." "I'm just a guest like you," Keanu replied. "But I don't think being loud will get your room ready any faster." A moment passed. The man clenched his jaw, muttered something about woke culture, then stepped away to make a phone call instead of continuing the fight. Suki exhaled, cheeks flushed. "Thank you." Keanu just nodded, eyes kind. No thanks needed. Just treat people well. Meanwhile, back in New York, while Keanu settled into his quiet hotel room overlooking the glowing skyline of Tokyo, halfway across the world, Darren Blake was having his first truly sleepless night in years. He sat at his kitchen table, swirling ice in a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. His $9 million penthouse suddenly felt cold, not in temperature, but in meaning. He stared at his reflection in the glass walls of his home and didn't like what he saw. The man who once prided himself on being respected now questioned whether he had ever been admired. Had anyone ever looked at him the way people looked at Keanu on that plane, not with fame in their eyes, but with respect in their hearts? He didn't think so. And for once, Darren didn't want to run from that thought. He wanted to sit with it. Let it hurt. Let it reshape him. Keanu's visit to the children's hospital. The next morning, Keanu arrived unannounced at Tokyo Children's Memorial Hospital. He'd visited it once years ago during a press tour, and he hadn't forgotten the kindness of the nurses or the quiet strength of the children. He didn't come with a camera crew. He didn't tell his agent. He didn't even notify the press. He brought 3 boxes of books, a bag of soft blankets, and a box of action figures, donated by a toy store he quietly paid for in full the night before. "Please give these to the children who need them most," he told the head nurse in perfect, gentle Japanese. But before he could leave, a small voice from down the hall called out, "Mr. Reeves." A boy no older than 9 stood at the doorway to the oncology wing, clutching a plastic IV pole. Keanu turned. The boy's eyes were wide. "Are you really him?" Keanu walked over, knelt down, and smiled. "Yeah. What's your name?" "Kenji." "Well, Kenji, it's good to meet you." Kenji's mother stepped forward, bowing apologetically. "He's seen The Matrix maybe 10 times. He doesn't stop talking about Neo." Kenji grinned. "You're my favorite fighter. You always protect the good people." Keanu blinked slowly, his chest tightening. Kenji continued, "I want to be brave like you, even when the doctors hurt me." Keanu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder. "You're already braver than I'll ever be." He spent the next 2 hours visiting children room by room, sitting beside them, listening, sometimes saying nothing, just being there. And that somehow meant more than words ever could. Back to Darren, a new chapter. The next morning, Darren showed up at a nonprofit organization he'd passed by 100 times but never entered. It was called The Second Door, a shelter that helped formerly incarcerated men reintegrate into society. He walked in unannounced, wearing jeans instead of a suit. He approached the front desk. "I'm not here to donate money," he said. "Well, I will, but that's not why I'm here. I want to help. I want to work. I want to listen." The receptionist blinked in surprise. "You want to volunteer?" "Yes. I want to start over. Somewhere that doesn't care how expensive my watch is." He pulled the Rolex off his wrist and handed it to her. "Sell it. Use it to fix something broken." She stared at him like he was speaking another language. But he was speaking the new truth, one he'd only recently learned. A truth that had nothing to do with fame or fortune, and everything to do with character. The ripple widens. What happened on Flight 782 wasn't filmed. It didn't go viral on TikTok. It didn't trend on Twitter. But it didn't need to. Because every person on that plane told someone, who told someone else. And the ripple spread. In quiet conversations at dinner tables. In gentle corrections when someone started to judge a stranger. In young girls like Leela writing letters to celebrities, not to ask for autographs, but to say thank you for being kind. The story of Keanu's quiet dignity passed like a story told around a fire, growing, glowing, warming hearts without ever needing to be seen. That night in Tokyo, Keanu stood on the rooftop of his hotel, sipping tea and watching the city lights below. Somewhere out there, millions of people were chasing status, chasing noise, chasing screens. But here, above it all, was peace. And though no one had cheered for him at the airport, and no one had clapped when he stood up for the hotel clerk, and no cameras had filmed his hospital visit, he smiled, because he didn't do it for attention. He never had. He did it because kindness doesn't need an audience, a quiet echo that reaches far. The man who said nothing, but changed everything. It had been 3 days since the flight. 3 days since Keanu Reeves said 12 simple words to Darren Blake that echoed louder than any insult could. It's okay not to recognize someone, but it's never okay to disrespect them. Those words hadn't gone viral. No one had recorded them, but they had become a quiet echo, traveling farther than anyone could see, changing one man in a suit, humbling a cabin full of elite passengers, and now, as the ripple grew, beginning to affect people beyond that plane. Keanu never asked for that kind of power, but he used it with precision, the kind only a deeply thoughtful man could wield. In the streets of Tokyo, Keanu's schedule in Tokyo had no press conferences, no scheduled interviews, no film premieres. It was personal time, and personal time for Keanu usually meant human time. That morning, he was walking through a narrow alleyway between bustling noodle shops in Shinjuku. The steam of boiling broth curled into the air, carrying the scent of ginger and miso. His hoodie was up, sunglasses on, but he moved slowly, deliberately, observing, breathing in life, not flashing lights. Ahead of him, an elderly man dropped his plastic bag. A dozen mandarin oranges scattered across the sidewalk. People passed. Some glanced but didn't stop. Keanu did. Without hesitation, he crouched down and began gathering the fruit. "Sumimasen," the old man muttered, embarrassed. "No problem, sir," Keanu replied in careful Japanese, placing the last orange gently back in the bag. The man looked up, his eyes full of quiet shock. You are." Keanu gave a polite smile. "Just a traveler." But the man reached into his pocket and pressed a small wooden charm into Keanu's hand. "For kindness," he said simply. Keanu bowed, and the man walked away. The charm. It was hand-carved, a tiny cedar wolf. It smelled of forest and time. Keanu slipped it into his pocket and moved on. Meanwhile, Darren Blake's first real day. Back in New York, Darren Blake stood in front of a group of men in folding chairs. Most were younger, a few were older. All wore expressions of hard life, some skeptical, others cautiously open. These were men who had served time. Some for theft, some for drugs, a few for violence. But all of them were trying to turn things around. And today, they were here for a workshop Darren had volunteered to run. He wasn't used to being ignored. He wasn't used to earning a room. But now he was living by a new rule. You don't deserve respect until you give it. "My name's Darren," he said simply. "I used to think money made me a good man. But a guy I barely knew, on a plane, showed me it's not about what you have. It's how you treat people." A hand went up. "Wait," a young man asked. "Is this that thing with Keanu Reeves? My sister told me about that. Said some rich dude got schooled by him on a plane." Darren nodded, not flinching. "That was me." The room fell silent. Then someone snorted. "Damn, that must have been brutal." Darren chuckled. "It was, but it was also the best thing that's ever happened to me." They listened, because real always speaks louder than rich. The talk show that almost didn't happen. Back in Tokyo, a producer from a popular Japanese late-night talk show got wind of Keanu's visit. They scrambled to reach his team, but Keanu hadn't told anyone he was in the city, not even his agent. A polite email was sent. No reply. Then a courier was dispatched to the hotel with a handwritten letter asking if Keanu would appear, not to promote anything, not to talk about movies, but to speak about kindness. Everyone expected the answer to be no. But the next morning, the show's producer received a call from the front desk. "Mr. Reeves would like to come, but only if there are no pre-written questions. He wants it to be honest." The host agreed. That night, Keanu appeared on Yoru no Hikari, the light of night, dressed in a simple black shirt and jeans. No makeup, no demands. The host, an older man named Daisuke, welcomed him with a bow. "Mr. Reeves, may I ask, why did you choose to come here?" Keanu smiled. "Because someone reminded me that even the quietest moments can become the loudest lessons." Daisuke leaned forward. "What do you mean?" Keanu looked at the audience. "I was on a flight. A man didn't recognize me. That's fine, but he judged me by my clothes, by how I looked. And I realized, people do that every day. Not just to me. To strangers, to waiters, to janitors, to each other." The room was silent. "I didn't do anything special. I just didn't shout back. But that moment taught me something too. That being kind doesn't need an audience. It just needs a heartbeat. The clip aired that night. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't viral. But it hit. And across Japan, a quiet wave began. People began tweeting stories of small kindnesses, tagging it #JustAKianaThing. But Keanu never saw the trend, because he didn't use social media. And he never needed to. A phone call that shook Darren. Back in New York, Darren's phone rang at midnight. He thought it was spam. But the voice on the other end changed his posture immediately. "Mr. Blake, this is Maria. I don't know if you remember me. I was your assistant 2 years ago." Darren froze. Maria had quit without notice, citing personal reasons. But what she didn't say back then, what he never cared enough to ask, was that she had been battling severe depression after her brother passed. Darren had berated her for missing deadlines, never once asked if she was okay. "I heard about the plane story," she continued. "I just wanted to say, if it's real, I'm proud of you." Darren swallowed the lump in his throat. "It's real, Maria. And I owe you an apology." He meant it. For the first time in his life, he didn't care how that looked. One final act in Tokyo. Before leaving Tokyo, Keanu stopped by a small community dojo in an old neighborhood known for its resilience. The dojo had seen better days. Paint peeling, mats frayed. The sign out front nearly unreadable. Inside, a young boy named Hiroshi was practicing alone. Keanu watched quietly from the doorway until the sensei noticed him. "Mr. Reeves." Keanu bowed. "I saw your dojo 10 years ago. I remembered the energy. I wanted to see it again." The sensei looked down, embarrassed. "It is not like it used to be." Keanu paused. "May I train with the boy?" The sensei nodded. And for the next hour, Hiroshi practiced jiu-jitsu with one of the most famous men in the world, who treated him not like a fan or a child, but like an equal. At the end, Keanu left quietly, but not before slipping a check into the donation box. No one saw the amount. But the renovations began the next week. Closing scene of Part 4. Back in his apartment in New York, Darren placed a new object on his mantel, a small wooden charm shaped like a wolf. He had it carved to match the one Keanu mentioned in a podcast interview he'd stumbled across that morning. He didn't know what the wolf meant, but he knew what it reminded him of. Someone who moves quietly. Someone who watches first, speaks second. Someone who defends others without asking for applause. A lone wolf, maybe, but not a lonely one. A wise one. And for the first time in his life, Darren hoped to follow, rather than lead. When kindness circles back. A return without a red carpet. Keanu Reeves stepped off the plane at LAX wearing the same hoodie he wore when he left. Same scuffed boots. Same messenger bag with the dog-eared paperback inside. The airport was flooded with noise, flashing lights, and hurried footsteps, but he moved through it like wind through a wheat field. Present, but never demanding attention. A limo had been sent for him. He declined it. Instead, he called an old friend named Marcus, a retired stuntman who now drove Uber just to stay busy. "I'm at Terminal B," Keanu said on the phone. "No rush, just whenever you're near." 30 minutes later, Marcus pulled up in a beat-up Toyota Corolla. He stepped out, grinning ear to ear. "Only you, man. Only you would pass up a black SUV with champagne for my dusty ride." Keanu smiled and tossed his bag in the back seat. Champagne tastes better when it's earned. As they drove down the 405, the LA skyline flickering in the distance, Marcus turned to him and asked, "You good?" Keanu looked out the window. "Better than I've been in a long time." Meanwhile, on the other side of growth, back in New York, Darren Blake was kneeling on the floor of a transitional housing center, painting baseboards in a hallway that reeked of old mildew and faint cigarette smoke. Sweat dripped down his back. His once manicured nails were now speckled with white paint. No one watching him would have believed he once graced the cover of Tech Titan Monthly. But Darren didn't care. A man named Terrence, who had done 5 years in prison for robbery, watched him with narrowed eyes. "You ain't gotta do that, man. You're the rich dude. This is grunt work." Darren paused and looked up. "Exactly why I should be doing it." Terrence tilted his head. "You for real?" Darren dipped the brush again. "Ask me tomorrow. If I show up again, you'll know." He did. Keanu's unexpected visit. 3 days after returning to LA, Keanu was invited to speak at a private leadership seminar for young entrepreneurs. He declined, as usual, but something tugged at him that morning, a quiet pull in his chest he couldn't ignore. He showed up unannounced, wearing jeans, a black t-shirt, and a soft denim jacket. The room was filled with 20-somethings in slick suits, all sipping $6 lattes and talking about hustle culture and crypto. The moment Keanu stepped on stage, jaws dropped. Phones were lifted. The MC stumbled over his notes. We didn't know you were coming." Keanu waved a hand. "It's okay. I'm not here to speak about money or movies, just life." He sat on a stool in front of the microphone. No slides, no branding. Everyone in this room is chasing something. Success, validation, legacy. I used to chase too. Still do sometimes. But lately, I've been asking myself, what if the real win isn't being seen, but seeing others? Silence. No hashtags. No motivational background music. Just truth. He paused. "On a recent flight, I was mistaken for someone ordinary. And in that moment, I realized that's exactly where I want to be. Because if you can be kind without people knowing who you are, that's when it counts the most." The room stayed silent for a beat longer than expected. Then someone at the back, one of the loudest self-promoters in the group, put his phone down and whispered to the person beside him, "That's the realest thing I've ever heard." An unseen letter. Later that night, Keanu returned to his modest home tucked away in a quiet part of Laurel Canyon. No gates, no valet, just a simple one-story house shaded by old trees. Inside, his assistant had left the day's mail in a neat stack on the counter. At the bottom was a plain white envelope with no return address. He opened it. Inside was a handwritten note. "Dear Mr. Reeves, you don't know me, but I was on your flight from New York to Tokyo. I sat in economy, 2 rows behind first class. I watched it all happen. I saw how you responded when that man mocked you. I saw how you didn't flinch. I want you to know that I've never forgotten it. I was on my way to Tokyo to take my own life. I had lost my job. My marriage had ended. My family had stopped talking to me. And then I saw you show grace in the face of rudeness. It made me wonder if there was still kindness in the world. I got off that plane, found a small cafe, and called my sister. I'm alive because of what you didn't say, because of the dignity you showed in silence. I'll never forget that. Thank you. Just thank you." Keanu sat on the edge of his couch, the letter shaking slightly in his hands. He didn't cry, but his breath hitched. He closed his eyes and whispered, "I hope you're still here." Darren's test. 2 weeks later, Darren Blake was invited to a high-profile tech networking gala. It was the kind of event he used to dominate. Exclusive rooftop venue, celebrity guest DJs, cocktail fountains. He almost didn't go. But something told him this was a test. He arrived in a gray jacket and black shirt. Clean, simple, nothing flashy. He wore sneakers instead of leather loafers. No watch. The room buzzed as people recognized him. "Darren Blake's here." Didn't he vanish? A young entrepreneur approached him. "Mr. Blake, you're a legend. I've always wanted to meet you." Darren smiled politely. "I'm just Darren. That legend guide died a little while ago. I'm starting over." The kid laughed, unsure if it was a joke. Later that night, Darren saw an old colleague at the bar, a man who once openly mocked junior staff and bragged about firing people just to make quarterly numbers look better. "Darren," he barked, "did you hear? I just closed a $3 million round this morning." Darren nodded. "Congrats. Did your team get a cut?" The man blinked. "My team." Darren finished his water and stood up. "If they don't win with you, you're not winning." Then he left, before dessert. The moment that shocked the internet. A full month after the flight, a new article hit a major online platform. The title, "How Keanu Reeves Changed My Life in 30 Seconds Without Saying a Word." It was written by Darren Blake. He didn't name Keanu directly. He called him the quiet man in 1A. But readers knew. The story detailed the moment on the flight, the look in the actor's eyes, the way he responded to mockery without a trace of ego. He didn't fight back. He didn't get petty. He didn't need to. He held up a mirror, and I saw myself clearly, for the first time in years. The article went viral, not because it was juicy, but because it was true. And truth, real, raw, uncomfortable truth, travels faster than gossip ever could. Closing scene of Part 5. That night, Keanu Reeves sat in his garden, tea in hand, the scent of night jasmine in the air. He looked up at the stars. So many people believed being a star meant lighting up the world with brightness and noise. But real stars, they didn't shout. They just shone, quietly. Always there, whether anyone was looking or not. The measure of a man. The man who didn't want to be a hero. In the weeks following the now legendary flight from New York to Tokyo, Keanu Reeves remained the same man he'd always been. He didn't change his wardrobe. He didn't launch a campaign. He didn't post a single word online. But the world around him started to shift. Not because he had demanded it, but because people had seen something rare. A man who chose compassion when ego would have been easier. A man who didn't retaliate, didn't correct, didn't need to win a moment, because his dignity had already won the room. And now, that quiet strength was being noticed in places Keanu never planned for. A school letter that reached his hands. It started with a second-grade teacher in Nebraska named Mrs. Estelle Harmon. She had read the article written by Darren Blake, the now viral story of the quiet man in 1A. She printed it out, read it aloud to her class, and then asked a simple question. What would you do if someone was mean to you for no reason? The room filled with tiny voices. I'd yell at them. I'd tell the teacher. I'd cry. But one little girl raised her hand. I'd be like the quiet man. Estelle smiled. What do you mean? I'd just be kind and quiet. Maybe they'd see they were wrong. That day, Estelle's students wrote letters to Keanu Reeves, even though they weren't sure how to send them. They didn't need to. Their teachers scanned them all and emailed them to a small nonprofit in Los Angeles that once helped manage fan mail for celebrity goodwill projects. They forwarded the letters, and 2 weeks later, Keanu sat in his kitchen, reading notes written in crayon. Dear Mr. Keanu, thank you for being nice even when someone was mean. I hope I can be like you. I have a little brother who's mean sometimes, but I won't yell anymore. My mommy says kindness is like magic. You're a wizard, Mr. Reeves. He read every letter and smiled, not because he was proud of himself, but because those little hearts had heard something deeper than words. Darren's first speaking engagement. Meanwhile, on the other side of the country, Darren Blake was backstage at a conference hall in Chicago. The event, Voices of Change, Rebuilding with Purpose. He had been invited not as a tech mogul, but as a man who had failed, learned, and started over. His palms were sweating. He wasn't used to nervousness. He used to speak on stages with stock tickers and laser pointers. Now he was expected to tell the truth. When he stepped on stage, the crowd applauded politely. He looked down at his old notes, typed bullet points about failure and resilience, and pushed them aside. I came here to talk about what I built, he began. But I think it's more important I talk about what I destroyed. A hush fell over the crowd. I destroyed trust. I destroyed kindness. I destroyed the chance to see people as more than tools. He paused. And then a man on a plane didn't destroy me when he had every reason to. He told the story, not the headline version. The real one. The one where he mocked a stranger, laughed at him, belittled him, and then watched that stranger respond with poise and grace. Keanu Reeves didn't fight me. He didn't shame me. He just stood there, calm, like a mirror I didn't want to look into. By the end of his talk, not a single phone was raised to record. No one wanted to break the spell of vulnerability that had settled over the room. And when he stepped down, dozens of people waited, not to network, but to thank him. The homeless woman and the umbrella. One rainy morning in Los Angeles, Keanu stepped out of a bookstore with a single paperback in hand. Murakami, a favorite of his. The sky had opened up unexpectedly, and passersby scrambled for cover. He walked slowly through the drizzle, unfazed. Then he saw her, an older woman, shivering under a thin blanket beside a boarded-up storefront. Her shopping cart was covered with a garbage bag, failing to protect her few belongings from the rain. Without hesitation, Keanu walked into a corner drugstore, bought an umbrella, a waterproof poncho, and a thermal blanket. He returned, knelt down beside her, and offered them. She looked up at him, cautious. "Why?" He smiled. "Because you're getting wet." She blinked. You're that actor." He shrugged. "Sometimes. Today, I'm just the guy with an umbrella." She accepted the gifts slowly. Tears mixed with raindrops on her cheeks. "You don't know what this means," she whispered. Keanu helped her cover her things, gave her the book he had bought, and said, "It's a good one, about feeling alone, but not really being." Then he stood and walked away. He didn't see the person across the street who took a photo. He didn't know it would be posted with the caption, "Keanu Reeves, giving kindness like it's the only currency that matters." He wouldn't have cared anyway. A ripple in the studios. Back in Hollywood, the photo circulated within minutes, and something unusual happened. A top studio executive saw it and called his assistant. "Get me the team working on the charity gala. I want Reeves as the keynote speaker." His assistant replied, "Sir, he doesn't do galas or keynotes. He barely shows up to premieres." The executive nodded. "Then we'll change the gala." 3 days later, Keanu received an invitation, not printed in gold foil, not sealed in wax, just an email with a single line. "Would you speak to a room full of people with power about what power really means?" He replied with 2 words, "If I can." A man transformed. Darren stood in front of the mirror, straightening his collar. He wasn't prepping for a meeting. He wasn't about to pitch investors. He was getting ready to speak at a juvenile detention center. When he arrived, most of the teens didn't even look up. They had heard speakers before. Most of them talked about getting your act together while flashing Rolexes and giving generic pep talks. But Darren didn't come in with a suit. He wore jeans, a flannel shirt, and a pair of sneakers scuffed from cleaning shelter floors. He stood in front of them and said, "I'm not here to tell you who you should be. I'm here to tell you who I used to be." He talked about power, about privilege, about a plane ride that changed his life, not because someone yelled at him, but because someone didn't. By the time he finished, several boys stayed behind. One of them, 17, with tattoos crawling up his neck, said, "So, that actor dude really just let it go." Darren smiled. No, he didn't let it go. He lifted it. And in doing that, he lifted me. That evening, Keanu walked to the edge of the beach in Santa Monica. The sky was painted with orange and pink streaks, the sun slowly dipping beneath the Pacific. He stood alone, hands in his jacket pockets, watching the waves roll in. A child ran past him, laughing. Her mother jogged behind her and paused when she saw Keanu. She smiled and whispered, "Thank you." He tilted his head, unsure. "For what?" The woman simply replied, "For showing the world how to be quiet and still be strong." Keanu gave a humble nod, and then turned back to the sea, where power came in waves, but the greatest strength was often stillness, when silence becomes a legacy. The night that changed the room. The venue was unlike any Keanu Reeves had ever agreed to speak at. Not a red carpet, not a studio press event, not a charity auction filled with luxury items and selfie booths. No, this was different. It was a private gathering called the Circle of Influence, a quiet but powerful annual event hosted by a group of philanthropists, human rights activists, doctors, and educators. No photographers, no live streams, no headlines the next morning. The theme this year, the silent revolution, changing the world without needing the spotlight. When Keanu walked in, wearing his usual black boots, dark slacks, and a buttoned flannel, no one clapped. Because that was the rule. No applause, just attention. The host, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Evelyn Rhodes, introduced him not with his film credits but with one simple line. "Tonight, we welcome a man who reminded the world that kindness without an audience is the most powerful kind of all." Keanu took the stage slowly, almost reluctantly. A single wooden stool waited under the lights. No notes, no teleprompter. He sat, hands folded, and looked around at the faces staring back. CEOs, authors, Nobel nominees, teachers, janitors. Then he spoke. Keanu's final speech. "I don't have a speech," he began. "I never really believed in them." Laughter, not loud, but warm. "I'm just here because something happened on a plane. Something small. But I've learned that the small things, they ripple out." He paused. "I was judged that day. And I've been judged before. We all have. But what made that moment different is that the man judging me changed. He didn't name Darren. He didn't need to. He chose to reflect. He chose humility. And when someone chooses humility, you have to meet them halfway." He leaned in, voice quieter now. And then something even more surprising happened. I changed. Because his change reminded me that grace is a cycle. You give it, and sometimes, it comes back. But most of the time, it goes forward. The room was still. I'm not a motivational speaker. I'm not a monk. I just act in movies. But the more I act, the more I learn that it's not the lines we say on screen that matter. He tapped his chest lightly. It's the lines we say in here. To ourselves. About others. About what it means to live. He stood, gave a short bow, and walked off the stage. No applause, just reverence. The reunion that no one expected. 2 weeks after that night, Keanu received a handwritten invitation in the mail. No official letterhead, just clean cream-colored cardstock with a name scribbled in ink. "Darren Blake requests the honor of your presence at a private community dinner." It was being held at the very same transitional housing center Darren had once painted by hand. Keanu hesitated, not because he didn't want to go, but because he didn't want to be the center of it. But something told him to go. When he arrived, the dinner was already underway. Folding tables were covered in mismatched cloth. Spaghetti and meatballs were being served by volunteers wearing aprons with stains and smiles. And at the center table stood Darren, clean-shaven, smiling, and wearing a second-hand suit that somehow fit him better than all his tailored ones ever had. He spotted Keanu and walked over slowly. They shook hands, not like strangers, not like fans, like equals. "I was hoping you'd come," Darren said, eyes full of gratitude. "I heard the meatballs were good," Keanu replied with a grin. They sat, ate, talked. Not about the past, but about what came after. Darren spoke of a mentorship program he'd launched, about a housing scholarship in his father's name, about apologizing to old employees, some who accepted it, some who didn't. "I'm not perfect," Darren admitted, but I finally know what direction to walk in. Keanu lifted his water cup. That's all any of us can do. They clinked glasses. No champagne. No fanfare. Just water. Just men. The young man who stood up. As the dinner came to a close, a young man named Malik stood up. He had been incarcerated at 18 and released at 24. Now 26, he was a mentor in the very center that had once given him a second chance. He looked around at the room of people, former inmates, volunteers, business folks, social workers. Then he looked at Keanu. I don't usually do this. I hate talking in front of people, he began. But I gotta say something. He took a breath. Everyone here knows me. They know I used to be angry. Real angry. I didn't believe people cared unless they had to. Until I saw a photo. He pulled out a wrinkled page from his pocket. A printed picture of Keanu giving an umbrella to a homeless woman. I don't know why, but that photo broke something in me. It made me stop thinking everyone with money was the enemy. Made me wonder if maybe, just maybe, some folks lead quiet revolutions. The room was silent. Then Malik turned to Keanu directly. You changed that man on the plane, yeah, but you changed me too. And I just want to say, thanks for showing me that kindness is strength. Keanu didn't respond with a quote or a bow. He stood, walked across the room, and hugged Malik. No one clapped, but everyone remembered. Darren's final step. 3 months later, Darren was on a small stage in a local bookstore in Brooklyn. He was launching his first book, not a memoir, but a collection of essays titled, When Silence Speaks, Stories of Small Moments That Changed My Life. It included a piece called The Quiet Man in 1A. He'd sent Keanu a signed copy. Keanu never wrote back, but he didn't need to. Darren had stopped needing applause. He had found purpose, and that was louder than any standing ovation. The full circle. Back in Los Angeles, Keanu was walking through Griffith Park when he passed a teenage boy crying quietly on a bench. He paused, then sat down a few feet away. You okay? He asked gently. The boy wiped his face. Bad day. Keanu nodded. Want to talk? The boy hesitated, then said, Someone said something to me. Made me feel worthless. Keanu looked at him for a long moment, then replied, You know, someone said something like that to me once. But the words didn't stay. The way I responded did. The boy looked up. What did you say back? Keanu smiled. Nothing. Later that night, Keanu sat at his desk. He opened a fresh notebook, stared at the blank page, and began to write. He didn't know if it would become a script, or a letter, or something just for himself. But he titled the page, The Kindness of Being Overlooked. Because sometimes the greatest gift wasn't to be seen. It was to see others. And through that, create a legacy that didn't glitter, but glowed, quietly, forever.